Amazing. Thank you so much, Mikio, for joining me again. Round two.
Yes, thanks for having me again.
How's your energy? I hope you are not feeling like, oh, Vivek, me
Let's see.
talking to Vivek one more time.
No, I think it has been long enough since last time.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty much long time back actually. There's so much happened since
Yes.
then, and I hope we can talk about many other interesting stuff. Uh, Learned a little bit more about the emerging technologies in the space of applied AI. But before we go there, I think this is something we started talking before the recording was amongst the many things happening around, in the mainstream world of large language models, generative AI, uh, it's very easy to get lost, both
Hmm.
as a professional, maybe directly working in the field, but also someone who is coming into the field newly, attracted by the innovations that's happening, the
Yeah.
capability to build something new on it. How would you see that the chaos and filtering out signals from this noise that's happening in the mainstream sources of information around that?
Yeah. Yes. No, I think it really is very hard. So the I mean also everybody that I see in academia, they always complain that there's just like more and more papers that you just need to follow up, right? So everybody has FOMO of missing the one paper that actually has something. I don't know how they do it, but it's so there's one guy, Sebastian Rushka, who has an excellent Substack, um, which something like dive into AI or something, and he has a monthly newsletter where he just summarizes. So I saw the last one he published is like 23 papers summarized in 3 sentences each, and then if you follow these, you get a bit, you can get a bit of overview.
Is that a
So
person or it's another of these fancy new chat GPTs
no,
doing
no, he's a
summarization?
real person. He's I think he was a professor now. Now he has some other position. He's also doing tutorials and so on, and then producing materials. So he definitely knows what he's talking about. Yeah, yeah. So that's the fun thing is, right. So you still have to rely on humans to sift through all of that. Yeah.
Building on that thread, how do you envision like a human expert summarizing these papers into 3 sentences versus a machine coming in and just summarizing? Like, is it possible even to differentiate it's human summarized or machine summarized according to you?
Oh, that's a good question. So what I've tried is so you take like the abstract or something of a paper, and then you say, give me the abstract in 3 sentences, and then it usually sort of it does that, and not it's quite well actually, right? But I think as a human, you're also looking for other things, right? So you want some independent opinion on like, is it really novel or what is interesting about that? And I'm not sure. So you really need to know the field. I think maybe if you do a chat GPT kind of thing, it's just based on what the paper think it's important, right? But so the real thing is so somebody reading paper and then saying, oh wait, this reminds me of another paper I read like a half a year ago and something like that. So yeah, that's the difficult stuff, I guess.
Totally. Okay, let's maybe get on this amongst all the crazy things happening. And I think we in past we had a conversation obviously outside the recording and different interactions I had. Uh, Maybe a question which could be cliche to ask you, but it's nonetheless important question. What do you make of it? What do you make of all this craziness around all these technologies these days?
Aha, what yeah, so I think it's there's really a lot happening, right? So on the one hand, there's really this amazing progress, right? I mean, just looking at the like the text that these or what these things are capable of, like on a purely like text processing level, we never had that before. So I don't know if you remember like the first Google Translate uh, things, right? So you could paste in some, so you could just like translate a website and then it was complete gibberish, but you somehow could make out what it was about. And now you have these models which just produce like perfect English or many other languages, right? And that's really amazing. So that's where did that come from? Suddenly, it's a bit unclear. And then people figured out they could also use these things to do that kind of processing that you do now, right? You just have a prompt and you say, do this, and then the machine does it. And that's I think that's for me really also is groundbreaking, that the people realized you could also just, so you have the large language model, and then you tell the machine like in plain English what it wants, and then because of all of, somehow it has learned to execute these things, right? And that's really amazing. So and this is I think at the base level like what's happening, and that has already a lot of impact, but then there's all this hype around it, right? So I think it's like all these AI doomers saying AI will be the end of humanity, and all these concerns about what about like what does copyright still mean, or is it? And then the question: are we already seeing like machines which are sentient or not? So there's all this additional stuff on top of it, and I think it's really hard to separate it all out, right? So obviously, there's a lot. I think there's also like there's a lot of marketing that's driving these things, right? And I think that so AI never was like that much in the mainstream as it has been like in the last 6 months.
Yeah. I mean, definitely if you look at the last 20, 25 years, there's so much of innovation packed into our phones and computers and the basic services that we use behind the scene. Your home vacuum cleaner to anything that you work with has some level of learning built into it. But what amazes me is how much it has impacted every single person I talk to. Like,
Yeah.
even in a remote part of India, when I talk to someone, they are like, oh yeah, I know about this, and I don't need to learn English, I can just generate something easily. Like, I was talking to someone who is preparing to put himself for an employment, and he's to write a cover letter, and he's not really good at writing cover letters, he's not really good at English. I was like, I don't have to worry about it, I can just feed into right prompts, it generates me a good prompts, and
Uh-huh.
get a letter. And they
Yeah.
were so happy, and I was like, wow. So it's almost the appeal, the user experience, the almost the interface of leveraging these is so democratic, and so it does the ease in it has attracted so many people.
Yeah.
I think for me that's one of the things which I'm super surprised by. I never expected it will touch so many people so fast, even though you can say some of it is still gimmicky, but I think it has touched a chord with people, and they're just getting on the bandwagon.
Yes. Yeah. But that's also a great story. So I'm always, I really like these positive stories about all of these, right? Which are not about exploiting people or taking like the work away from artists and not giving them any money or something. That's a great story. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I agree. So the like my daughter, she's in the like 11th grade, right? And ChatGPT, that's like that's everybody's using it to. So it's a real problem that people are using that to do their homework, for example, right? And I think never. So this really reminds me again. So in the 90s, the first time I saw a URL on the side of a truck, right? So URL. So this suddenly I was like, oh man, internet has become mainstream. Suddenly you see this HTTP something on the side of a truck driving through town. So it's a bit like that. Suddenly it's everywhere.
I'm sad it was just HTTP, not HTTPS.
Yeah, that was back in the days.
Talking about education and its impact, and I think it's a good example of even 6-year-old having to use all these technologies. Coming from academics, like, how do you envision the impact of this on academics, on the way we have been looking at education? Do you foresee already some fundamental changes happening because of these mainstream technologies in play?
Uh, yes. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm personally, I think I'm old enough, so I'm like, I'm a bit like the guy who said photocopiers are evil because in the olden days you would just extract by hand and then really learn what we're doing. Now we sort of have the same thing again. So, uh, but I think on the other hand, right, so there has already been this huge impact. Like a few weeks ago, there was like the stock price of these education platforms crashed. Um, right, so I also heard like Stack Overflow, the traffic on Stack Overflow is going down because people are now using these AI tools. Or there are these services where you can upload a PDF and then you can talk with a chatbot like on one. So I think it will become much more interactive, right? And I think that's probably a good thing, right? So it's less like you have to read this this book, and then but you can actually talk to a person, and that maybe again, like you mentioned, democratization, right? So it gets easier access to people who could just talk to these things. Yeah, I mean, as long as it's free, also costs money to run these things, but yeah,
Yeah.
could be a huge impact. I think. I hope.
Do you foresee, maybe I will sound like a doomsayer, but maybe let's put on the hat of a doomsayer for a moment. Let's, get in the shoes a bit.
Yeah,
Uh, Everything becomes so derived
yeah,
that originality is missing.
yeah.
Do you foresee, do you have a feeling about that as well?
Yes, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think right now we haven't really fully realized like what it is, right? But in a way, it's just combining stuff that already existed before, which I mean, in a way, is also a bit like human creativity, but still, yeah. It's so right now when you use generative AI and you get these artworks or something, it's so somebody had this idea before and now it's sort of combined. So yeah, but it also again it reminds me of when they invented sampling machines for music, right? Suddenly you could just record a piece and you could just replay it. And then I think you went through stages where people said, no, you have this software and you can just everybody can click together like a hit song, and nobody needs to learn instruments again. And I think we will have something like that again, right? So at some people will realize. So it becomes like a new tool. That's one thing, and then it's about like how do you use these tools, and it's still about like what you as a human has to say. And then the other thing is, yeah, people will also transcend it, and then uh, so I think they will come back and realize it's still sort of about the human factor and all of this. I hope, maybe, yeah,
Maybe building upon that more, do you, maybe I'll put a philosophical touch to it. So I will have a lot of hats in front of me, right? So a
yeah,
doomsayer hat, I'm putting on my philosopher hat a moment. Uh, my assumption is a lot what we do today at work, and I know I'm moving and putting going to a tangential view of things from education to work. I have a feeling a lot what we do is still generative. It's building upon something that we read, something that we saw, something that we
mm,
observed, and we are basically inferring that and just building another summary of it and sharing it and applying. And I still see there is some originality or creativity. Let's maybe take the example of building a system, right? A
yeah,
software system. A lot what you do is still use boilerplate and you build upon an existing code base, or a code base that you extract or put it out from Stack Overflow, or maybe someone you saw that code in an open source project and you're like, oh, this is the right implementation of
yeah.
a sorting algorithm, and you started building it. How do you see from building systems and this idea that a lot what we do today is all still very generative, but less about original
Yeah.
thinking, original? How do you, what do you take off, what do you make of that, and what is your point of view on this?
Yes. Well, I think the right. So I also agree. Like a lot of so depending on the framework, as you say, there's a lot of boilerplate code, and nobody can memorize this, right? But I'm always wondering. So it seems like we're patching the problem at the wrong end. So I mean, Stack Overflow already was a bit like, so instead of making our libraries easier to use and the interface cleaner or something, instead, right, we build these tools where we can quickly look up the 20 lines of code that you need to do this one thing, right? So I think if you have a really well-designed library, then put only just two lines of code. So, and in a way, so what's now happening is so these things get even more interactive, right? So it's not just a template, but you can also say, but now change it to do this and do this, and then sort of it all adapts. But the code itself will still be very complex, right? And then maybe we just use another tool to sort of to refactor it, or so sometimes I think maybe we're like the last generation that actually has input each byte like individually on a keyboard, and then future generations will just use some tools to transform it. I don't know. But I think it's also a bit like the patching the problem on the wrong end.
Yeah, I excuse me. I think I agree to that. I think for me it's like if I look at the analogy of building systems, um, there was this case where if I don't think I think you remember there was this security issue in OpenSSL some years ago,
Hmm.
and or it was OpenSSL, or I think log4j or some kind of logging library that
Oh yeah,
Java uses,
Log4j. Yes, I remember that
if I
one.
remember that, yeah, correctly. And I think this security vulnerability was just discovered, and everybody just got completely crazy that so many systems use this dependency so
Yeah,
widely. And I use this analogy comes to me because I almost feel that we build system on existing abstractions, which is how we build systems, and it's still in some way generative. And if the fundamental building blocks are flawed or they have issues, it propagates, and there is this effect of
yeah,
compromising the entire systems built on it. Similarly, if I train and I do generative systems built upon inaccurate information or a source of information which has inherent flaws,
yeah,
and by copying and using and again training and going multiple levels again and again and you being used in everywhere, it would become very difficult to really understand, hey, where was the
yeah,
fault,
yeah.
which was the source material that actually should have been fixed, and how do you trace that? How do you think about this analogy, and what comes to your mind when you hear this?
Yes, there. I think the problem is there's no source material anymore, right? So at some point it was generated by somebody, and it's not even. Yeah. So if it's like old school composition of components, at least you could fix it in principle, right? But if it's like the whole system has been used with AI, built with AI, yeah, maybe yeah. Then you need the AI to fix it for you. So that's I don't know. Maybe that's a solution, but I don't know. Yeah. I think also I think the tools still also lack like the kind of exactness that you need to really be able to push out code, right? I think
What
they
do you mean by
always.
exactness?
Yeah, so the other day I asked ChatGPT to solve like a quadratic equation for me, and so the output like 5 steps. It said like it moved the variables around, everything was right, and then it looked very plausible, right? It factored it, and then could just read off the solution. And then I checked it and it was wrong. It was just wrong. And then what happened was that so everything was okay, but then in step 5, when it did the factorization, I don't know. It was just like, yeah. And language is also a bit. I think language is a bit inexact like that, right? And they draw from analogy and sort of. So if this had been a text, maybe it would be okay to use like a slightly different formulation. But with code, it's not. So and I think that's the same. So if you generate like JavaScript or some other programming language stuff, I'm actually surprised that most of the code is like syntactically correct even. So yeah, I think it's not still not there fully.
So you need maybe systems, obviously, that generate, but also systems to verify and validate. It's like a control system that is producing information based upon, generating information based on pre-trained information sources that it has, but there is another system that validates and checks, hey, are
Yeah.
you hallucinating? Are you really sure?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
does that conversational style of course correcting itself over time, like the
Yeah.
auto GPTs of the world doing it?
Yes. Yeah. I mean that's one of the big problems in general, right? So you're sort of generating, but it's not. I think like when a human talks, they are still like, could this be? So you do another pass and so on. But I also suspect maybe this will be somebody will figure out a way to use what they have right now to also do that. I mean, so after all, if you learn mathematics as a human, right, you also have to learn like to be really exact with what you're doing. So maybe you can teach the machines the same thing, or we can somehow make the bridge between the language part and more exact part. Um, yeah. So I think the sort of a bit the scary thing is now that it's so mainstream, right? We parallelize the research work so much. I mean, we have literally, I don't know how many, like 10,000, 100,000 humans thinking about this. So I think at some point all these problems will be solved, maybe. Yeah.
Then I think the other thing that comes to my philosophic while putting my philosophical hat is uh, the idea about this particular systems almost um, approaching almost human-like intelligence or even super intelligence and reaching singularity of sorts. where people get really scared.
Yeah.
What do you think kind of breeds that level of thinking and fear at the moment? Do you think it just the demonstration is so wildly amazing and surprising that people just extrapolate it, or do you really see the birth of some level of uh, sentient system?
Yes. Yeah. But I think what's happening, like on the like psychologically on the human side, right? I think it's so it's very clear. So we're just inferring a lot about the. So I mean, in a way, right? When we talk to other people, we also cannot read their minds. So we're already inferring. So we're just used to inferring like a lot of what's actually happening, sort of inside the brain box or something. And I think when people talk to a thing and it felt real, right? It felt human. They made this extra step, and then and I mean then they really made really dumb like methodological mistakes. Like there's the story from this one guy at Google who sort of who thought that so he did. I mean, I think he outright asked the chatbot, so are you conscious, or so are you afraid of death or something? And then of course if you look at the training set, I'm sure there's some discussion about all of this, and then it just would produce like a very human sounding answer. And then he said, oh my god, it's sentient. But of course I think this is not how you would do that. And so sometimes I wish people would read more science fiction, right? Because they're like, this has been discussed in science fiction before. Remember, like in Blade Runner, there's this whole, like, how do you test? And then I think like in Star Trek Next Generation, there's this whole thing like with Data. I think right at some point he even gets the rights to be like taken as a real individual and so on. So I think people would have a bit more knowledge about that, and then approach the question a bit more, like less naively, let's say. Yeah.
I think I think I saw some of your tweets where you've almost said that don't connect these things to actual physical
Yes.
things.
Yeah.
And I saw your tweet and I was like, okay, that's actually the more valid point and more valid, I would say, fear that we
Yeah.
have. How do you see that? How maybe it's good to elaborate on your
Yeah.
on your tweet.
Yes. No, I think for me always, and this is something I've been repeating, and I'm not finding the resonance I think that this should get, but right. So these machines by themselves, they can't do anything until we let them, right? And this was, I think, the first time I had this thought was a few years back, and there was a story that some kid got raided because on Facebook he was chatting about doing something, but it was, for a human, it was pretty clear it was all sarcasm, or they weren't being serious or something, right? And then but what happened is, so you hook up the system to analyze all these, I mean, which is already a bit questionable. But then if you let these machines trigger like a bunch of police people raiding a home, right? That's the point where it gets very dangerous. So if you hook them up to real world systems where they can make decisions which affect people, right? So I mean, I personally think that that let these self-driving cars drive around in the US, that's like super dangerous, right? And it's really irresponsible in a way, because so once you have this like a ton of metal steel running around in the city, who knows what can happen. Yeah, and that's the kind of thing I'm afraid of, right? There was this demo by also for some military applications or something. I think you should just stay away from that. So
So maybe I'll not kind of turn this into a headline that Mikio says something. I'm not that media.
yeah.
But what is your stance then on actually innovating in a space of self-driving car? What would do you see it maybe approached differently than perhaps what it is being and doing at the moment? Because everybody's on the bandwagon, right? So Waymo has been doing since many, many years
Yes. Yeah.
now, but I think there are a lot of other companies which are in that space. What would have been a different approach of dealing with this rather than not actually putting a machine in the wild to learn from?
Yeah. No, I think a lot of things went wrong, right? I think one was sort of Tesla marketing this as you could just let it drive alone. So this was definitely wrong. And then I think that's really some part where like the regulators would need to come up with some rules and say you can only do this if blah blah blah, and like all these safety measures, and like a emergency shutdown, like in the movies, that's what we need. So yeah, I think it was really quite reckless to just say like, oh, you can just. I mean, do you remember when the first autopilot came out? So people were driving and sleeping or watching a movie while driving the Tesla. It was really bad, I think. Yes, but and again, right? So you know from Asimov these three robotic laws. So that's right. So that's the kind of thinking I think that should go into this before you before you hook up these systems to anything real. So I don't even care. I'm not even. So for me, I think so whether these thing maybe become super intelligent at some point, that's one thing, right? I mean, they can do this. I don't care, but sort of letting them roam freely. That's I think where we should be really cautious.
Right. Okay, let's move on. Very easy
Yes.
topic from now on. Okay, so let's move on to very, very easy topic, regulations. Okay.
Okay.
I think the couple of things, or not couple, I'm absolutely wrong about numbers at the moment. So there's so many things happening on regulation space,
Yeah.
right? So you see Sam Altman going around the world speaking about their technologies, speaking to every single government. I just saw so many sessions with him. It's like this is something happening here.
Yeah.
Um, and also Italy banning ChatGPT and then going back on that. There was a question in Germany whether this would be banned or not,
Yeah.
and people were worried about it. Um, what is maybe putting in spotlight around it? How do you see regulation in this space?
Hmm. So it's a very difficult. I also don't have an answer, right? But I think uh so one thing, so with Sam Altman, I also said this on Twitter, so I can also already made this public. But so for me, I'm really wondering what his motives are, right? So for me, it seems a bit like they obviously were one of the first, and now they want to get in on the regulation to control it. And then I mean, they already said like, for open source, they shouldn't have like a certain capability threshold or something, right? So I mean, so for me, it feels like strange that on the one hand, they're pushing this product onto the world, and then on the other hand, they say we're super afraid what will happen, so please regulate us. It's I think I'm not sure this has ever happened before. So yeah, that's one thing. And then I think the other, so with all the regulation, I mean, so I haven't read like everything like in depth, but from time to time you see something, right? So I know people who have been like in the EU, so the EU invited experts to get feedback on the proposal and so on. And so I saw bits and pieces of it, but it's also really hard, right? We don't have a definition what intelligence is. So what do you regulate? And then I think in the current EU draft, so there's a kind of a discussion or like a definition of what it is, but it's super broad. So like any statistical method that does some like a thresholding function could already be considered as an intelligent system and so on. Yeah, and I don't know. So um, I mean, so I think the other day I saw that Japan has decided to sort of lift the copyright protection for training data. Have you? Is it true? Have you also seen that?
I
Or
haven't, I don't know actually,
yeah, I
so I haven't
just saw
checked
it
that.
in one place, right? And I think this is all very very groundbreaking stuff. Yeah, but yes, I don't know. I think it's a bit like, so it reminds me of, when GDPR came out, there was also a lot of discussion that people said we actually, so we don't know like what it really means till there were a few lawsuits and people were actually trying to define what it all means and test whether the laws make sense or not. And we probably have something very similar for AI. Yeah.
How do you then, as a practitioner, navigate this space while you realize that there are these rough areas where you don't know if something will be regulated, or
Yeah.
am I doing this correctly, or I'm not infringing anything? I don't know what changes tomorrow for this. How would you probably advise someone as a practitioner coming in and maybe navigating themselves in this
Yeah.
craziness around regulation and what is allowed, what is not?
Yes. So I'm definitely not a lawyer, right? So I cannot don't hold me to it. But I think there will. So one thing is, I think there will definitely be some regulation coming, right? And I think GDPR already gave some ideas, right? So it will probably be very important that everything is documented and people can see like what happens and doesn't happen. And then I mean, there's a bunch of stuff like people should give their consent to using the data and so on. So, but I mean, yeah, it's a bit of a risk right now. So. I mean, and this is assuming that you want to play by the rules, right? So you could also like the big, I mean, you could, as everybody knows, right? So these LLMs, they are just trained on terabytes of data that was crawled from the web. So and it seems to me like these people are definitely sort of they are just doing it, and then let's see what happens. So yeah,
And I think it will be very difficult also to think about enforcing the regulation, right? So
yeah,
for me, one thing that I really saw from the implications of things like GDPR, I think now it has become a commodity, right? You can easily implement techniques and methods and protocols to make sure that you're protecting your data,
yeah,
taking in control of different regulations around GDPR, the different practices. So it's also learned knowledge. There's also businesses around it. Sometimes bigger companies outcompete smaller companies because they have the muscle and the organizational
yeah,
will and also the money to enforce that regulation, but perhaps a startup may not have immediately. So it also maybe creates this kind of skewed environment that you incentivize large organizations who have the will, almost the muscle to kind of exercise regulation, but a smaller cannot.
mhm,
So there's like very difficult boundary to say what should be in regulation and what should be not, and how do we create an equitable environment where we allow competition without regulation creating like uneven
yeah,
ecosystem.
yes, yes, very well put. And I think the so what's makes this hard is right all these AI doomers who are saying like this is even more important than climate change or something, right? So in this environment, it's well, it seems to me, or at least it seems to me that's like what Sam Altman is trying to do, right? Push everybody to regulate with this like with this doomsday picture. But at least so I have some faith in the EU bureaucracy that they will take their time and then try to make the right thing.
All right. Let me maybe go to another part of our interesting stuff. So maybe more practical. Um, from a use cases point of view at the moment, like as a programmer or builder of a system, what do you think as a builder you can already start doing, like leveraging these technology and building
Yeah,
something? Is there something that you've seen as almost like a prominent use case you should absolutely go and adopt and make it happen, compared to things that are still on fringe, you can learn from it but don't put it in production? Is
yeah,
there a kind of
okay,
a spectrum that you see?
yeah. Yes. No, I think the all the like the flashy demos which we see right now, these are sort of the like what's possible now. So all this generative AI stuff, and then everything that's sort of like a chat. I think the this plugin system with OpenAI. So I'm not sure how well it works, but that's also interesting of like making the bridge between these systems and more like classical normal computer systems. Um, yeah, but I think the what's still hard is to apply these things to data at scale, right? Because it's so like running one prompt is quite expensive, so you pay by the token.
Hmm.
So the stuff where you would just, I mean, so right in the like in the olden days, so a year ago, when you have like a document classifier, you would maybe just run it over everything and then figure out like what are the interesting documents, like I don't know, classifying news articles or customer replies or something, customer inquiries, and figuring out what they want. Um, but I think that's something that could be very expensive now, right? Because so if, for everything you send there, you pay a few cents, and then it gets very expensive. And also the GPU computing power is very high. And then the other thing is, right, so I'm waiting, or I hope at some point we will get to a point where these systems will be optimized so that they can run locally, like on your phone or on some computer, because uh, I think right now everything where you care about the privacy of the data, that's also very like not easy use cases, right? But yeah, I mean, I think it's yeah, it's a bit hard to say, right? Often with technologies, there's like so first you have this obvious use cases, and then it takes a while, and then somebody comes up with a really cool idea that nobody's thought about. So I don't know what this is, unfortunately. So,
Yeah. I mean, back in the days when we were doing data product development, we always assumed, okay, before we ship something which looks really smart, like you're building a recommendation system,
yeah,
right? So try to learn as much as possible, follow iterative system or
yeah,
iterative way of building it. You don't have to have a learning system behind the scene to learn of what you want to do. So you can fake it till you make it.
yeah,
Um, I think what I get surprised is obviously it's advertised. Oh, it's so easy to kind of plug and play and move things in a couple
yeah,
of days. You have a fancy demo ready. And I think for me, it was little in contrast of how I think we used to approach building
yeah,
such data products. I mean, there are concerns around, oh, we are pushing this to millions of customers, but now with, oh, demo really working and it's impressive. Maybe it works great for 70% of scenarios and it's really impressive, but for the 30%, it just really destroys itself. What is that you're seeing around that? Like assuming like accessing APIs, expect the costing
yeah,
part, which is still complicated. How do you see that as the
yeah.
transition from the data product development processes?
Yes. Yeah, I think I fully agree with you. So the way it's marketed, and also what I'm hearing from people who are like, so I talk to people who are sort of still new, but they say, oh, but AI is solved now, right? So we can just use these things. And in a way, so what we didn't have like a few years back are all these pre-trained models. So that's definitely the case, right? So in the olden days, like 5 years ago, you would first need to accumulate all this data, and then you could maybe think about training a model and so on. Um, but I'm not sure it's true. And also, I think when it comes to your specific use case, you still have to have all this like evaluation frameworks in place, right? So I mean, you could just use the ChatGPT, the OpenAI, or whatever model, but just like with any machine learning system, right? So just looking at a few instances and then saying, "Oh, this looks good," right? You shouldn't do that. So instead, you should have some evaluation data set, which doesn't have to be large, like a few hundred instances, and then something that automatically evaluates and gives you some numbers, and then you have something to work with, right? So because yeah, so once you have like a large number of customers, as you also know, right? When you deploy something, they will always find the edge cases. It's just like so many eyes. And then if you have something that sort of looked good in the demo, but you never tested it, then I guess you will be in for a surprise. And then, yeah, and then after that, so the interesting thing is also what happens after that, right? Because then
Hmm.
suddenly you're thinking about, okay, fine tuning, prompt engineering, all of that, but that also should be driven by some quantitative approach. So, and then you're back to, having the same like testing infrastructure as before. So yeah. So I think it's not, I think once, if you get serious about these things, it's not that different from before. It's just that you have, yeah, models that can do stuff that couldn't be done before, and you don't have to train them yourself.
Yeah. Maybe let's go into the rabbit hole of testing these systems. I think, yeah, I should still agree with you. They're not too different on how we used to develop data driven or data driven products. Testability has always been a challenge, right? So I don't think that has been solved yet.
Yeah,
Uh, there are especially few things that are happening. One, I think building tests, just writing tests is becomes so easy these days. I usually do it with my co-pilot is just put a code
uh-huh.
and say write tests for me,
Yes,
which is great. I think it just improves that part, but obviously sometimes the tests are too verbose and I really have to then be an editor and say I don't need this, I need that, I need
yeah.
this. But the other part is, and this is something that I've been talking about, is when you have systems like these, how do you even think about testability? Like,
Hmm.
how do you say this is better summary than the other? I mean, I'm probably throwing a naive question out there, but it could be built up into almost like, oh, is this a right generative output compared to maybe another
Yeah,
model? How do you approach that?
yes, a good question. I don't I think in the end, right, in the end, you would need to show it to a human and have human labelers. Just just like in the again, just like in the olden days. Uh, I mean, it's also what's funny is all these models. So they're trained, right? But what are they trained on? They're just trained on like how good they are on. I mean, they're just these language models, right? They're
Right.
just on how good are you on predicting the next word. And if you really dig in, it's a very simple metric. So and maybe there's a different answer which is just as good or something, or a sort of. So it already measures it in a very weird way. Yeah. But I think yeah. I mean, so test cases. Question. Yeah, because you obviously don't want like I mean, you somehow have to think about it and then break it down in a way that makes sense and then have like positive and negative examples like before. I mean, so some people or some approaches for fine tuning, they're actually using a language model to blow up the result, so the example set, right? So
Hmm.
you give them like, okay, this is the type of interaction I want to have, and now produce like 5 more which are of the same kind, and then they can just do it, and then you get more data points. But yeah, but at the end of the day, so I think it's still like customer testing, just like before. Unfortunately, no, not unfortunately.
At least we are relevant for some time.
Yes, just to produce more data. That's what we're still good for.
I think that's a very, I mean, we have been becoming a species. Uh, I think using systems that thrive on the more we use, right? So,
Hmm.
and data is the oil, right? So the more we interact with the system, the more data we generate, the more we make these systems better to interact with us and learn and improve over time. Um, Staying on the topic of building systems and implementation, I think for someone who is not quite adept to building systems, maybe someone who's an executive or looking at probably from a lens of business, it's like, oh, I used to need 10 engineers to build this. Now with
Hmm.
co-pilots, I need like two. I don't need the eight. How do you see that? What is your argument around that?
Yeah, good question. I think you still need at least 3, right? Because it's 2. If one goes, then sort of the bus factor is too high or something.
Okay, bad
Yes.
example. Three.
Yes. 3. Also, if there are ties, so no. Um,
But at least consensus is not there.
yes, exactly. Yeah, I think time will tell a bit. So I think it seems definitely like fewer people could do more stuff with the help of these tools. But then you probably need better people also because they need to double check like what Copilot is generating, right? So you need some experience to sort of to see the code and then say, okay, yeah, this is like almost correct or something. It could be very hard. Um, yeah, I think that's a bit like what everybody's afraid of. But then I think on the other hand, right, like even if you don't have a lot of experience and you have a tool like that, you can be much more productive. So yeah, new tools. I mean, again, so I don't know why I'm drawing so much experience, so much analogies. Uh, but when I started to learn coding, back in Emacs, back in the 90s, there was no syntax highlighting or no like type hints or anything.
Hmm.
So and yeah, and I'm not saying you had to have everything in your head. So of course you also made bad mistakes, and I really like it so right now. But you have all this information in there, and I'm thinking maybe it will be like similar like that, right? So yeah. So hopefully, I don't know. We will see. We will see. Or we'll figure out these tools are like I don't know. But you're using GitHub like Copilot a lot.
Yeah.
Has it
Uh,
changed the way you code and work?
I think it does. I think it also made me sloppy a bit
Hmm.
because I'm kind of, as you said, I need to review things, and I was like, oh, let's just get it working. And it just works. And it's like, amazing. It's working. Let me write some tests. And okay, it's complete in some sense. But I think the ease of getting something built, at least something simple, relatively quickly, is so attractive.
Yeah.
And I think that is a very enticing thing to have. So definitely I see a productivity boost of sorts. I haven't quantified how much of sloppiness has come into the way I build things because I'm now relying on these co-pilots that much.
Yeah.
But this is something I would love to also
Yes.
maybe test. And I think I want to quote here. I think I also heard somewhere, maybe it was just listening to Sam Altman in these conferences. He said, I think when Italy banned the, I think they banned chat GPTs and these
Hmm.
co-pilots, the developers had a productivity drop of, I don't know what he quoted, like
Yeah.
20% or
What?
something. I
Uh,
don't know how he measured that, but it was
yes. How
fun,
did?
fun anecdote to kind of take in.
Yes.
But yeah,
But
I
and
think
the other thing is, so everybody focuses on what the people talk about. So it's easy to get something quick, right? But as you
true.
know, or as we both know, so the like most of the work, especially in big enterprises, is sort of refactoring, building stuff, dealing with legacy software, and so on. And I think I think there's no way really around like designing a good system that not just works, but is also like all the other things that it should be, right? So, and I'm not
Right.
sure how we get. I mean, if at some point you could just like put in a bunch of legacy code and then out comes like the perfectly refactored bug for bug compatible refactored piece of code, that would be really, I think everybody would be happy about that.
I agree. I think for me, my happy dream is I point a system to an existing legacy code base and I can get easily
Yeah.
onboarded to it. I know what to change. And there's no documentation, there's no test, and I have been given a legacy code base. Now figure things out. It's like, wow, I would love to have that co-pilot
Yes.
back in days where when we started almost 20, I've started 20 years ago. It's like, oh my God, it was I had a rite of passage to be through a legacy system where you're
Yes.
like crisis after crisis after crisis to just to understand a system. And
Yeah.
he's like, oh my God. And I now sound like an old person saying, oh no, you have to go through that kind of
Yes,
rite of passage. Otherwise, you're not an engineer. And it's like, really? Are you
because it made
sure?
you a better engineer, right? You had to go through this
Maybe
to know the
I'm
costs.
1x engineer.
Yes.
I'm just 1x engineer after that. And people emerge these days as 10x engineer. But
I don't know. Yes, time will tell.
okay. I know we are short on time, so I'll probably talk about some very easy topics now. Okay, even easier than
Okay.
regulation. Okay, so you
Okay.
know where I'm going with this.
Yes.
Uh, how are you thinking about the alignment problem,
Okay. Okay.
especially about all these systems? How do you let them think the way humans think, the values that humans values have?
Yes, that's really hard, right? I think these um yeah, because so okay, one yeah, okay. So this brings us to my other favorite topic. So actually a few years ago I bought the domain dog level AI. Have I ever told you this?
Not
So I
now,
bought
but
a
I'm
domain.
hearing it now, so it's a
Yes.
breaking news.
Because I had another friend and we were always discussing about this, and I always said like I don't want human level AI, I want dog level AI. And so why dog level AI? It's because I think dogs have like a couple of very interesting things which I would like to have from a robot, right? So
Hmm.
they're very empathic, they're like social, they build relationships, and they have these amazing motor skills, right? And they have this strong, like, I mean, I'm more like a cat person, but the so they really care about their group, right? So have you
Are
ever
you
seen
sure
like
you're cat level, you're cat person, you're not a dog
I like,
AI?
yeah. Cat level AI doesn't make sense because I think cats are not that social. Yeah.
Hmm.
But so there's something, and somehow we sort of we over focused on like language capabilities and being able to play Go very well and all of
Yeah.
that. And so now we built something that sort of lives in a space completely. Like, I mean, I think there's a lot of word knowledge in there, but it's all in text form, and they have no idea what they're doing. So there was a lot of, yeah, every time somebody says like the AI didn't do this or it didn't like respect me or it didn't, so it was biased. So I think it's like a category error because these things, they don't have morals or anything. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think the current approach is they try to sort of bake it in and make sure the answers are on the right level. But fundamentally, I think unless we can teach a machine to care about like how we feel or how another person feels, that won't be solved. And then once we do this, we have to make sure it doesn't become a psychopath and just manipulates us really well now because now it knows how we work. So I don't know, but I don't think there's a lot of research in that area, at least nothing like that is on that scale.
Hmm. I mean, when I was hearing you, this comes to my mind that, when we were growing up, our parents were like, okay, how do I have kids with values,
Hmm.
basic empathy, right? You you look at people who have these qualities, right? You have role models and you read good text. You
Hmm.
surround yourself with people who you think are good and who have the right morals and values, and you build incentives around that. If I do something which is morally right or what is expected from a right human, you're rewarded for it. Or and if you don't do it, you're kind of penalized for it. And that, especially when you are young, your brain is very malleable and you capture that, and that creates a frame of reference for yourself and the model that on which you operate. So I think that was my parents' generation. Like surround yourself with the good people,
Uh-huh.
have these fundamental models, uh, read things. I think if you're a religious person, you obviously
Uh-huh.
read
Okay,
religious
yeah.
texts, and then you almost say we solved the alignment problem. And
Through
for
text.
humans,
Yes.
I can call it that it can also backfire, but
Yeah.
I don't know if there is also a similar approach um, to this.
Yeah.
Like you have role models for these robots or these bots, and you surround themselves with these bots and learn from
Yes,
them.
maybe. Yeah, but so I think, so essentially it's what we already talked. So this like making up stuff about what you think is going on in some other person's mind, right? And I think so empathy on some level is so you look at somebody, or if you listen to them, if you understand their position, you sort of you get an idea like how they feel, right? And then you begin to understand, okay, if I do this, like you feel the pain that somebody else might feel, and this is ultimately, yeah, I think this is like a human quality, uh, which sort of is an internal incentivization, right? And in the yes, and the yeah, but on the other hand, you're right. So we're being shown a lot of role models, but maybe that's also just to unlock us, like to guide ourselves to like how to work with this capability and the yeah. And these large language models, so I think on some way, very implicitly, they maybe have that, right?
Hmm.
Because they certainly have also been trained on text where like people do like stuff to each other and then, but it's not, yeah, it's very abstract for them, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think ultimately the question is, do LLMs have feelings or not?
Or if they can express the feelings
If they,
correctly and they can generate those feeling texts, maybe they have.
yeah. I think they can fake having feelings, but yeah, but then so this is I think this is a very fun thing also, right? So of course, so you could say, okay, there's some hidden state, right,
Hmm.
which represents that they're actually sad, and this leads them to generate text, which is like as if they're sad. So is it the same thing as us
Yeah.
being sad or not? I don't know.
Yeah, I think if these models become, and I know there's a lot of work going on, and I'm aware that they are becoming multimodal very soon, right?
Yeah,
So right now they're more text and imagery, but
yeah,
obviously over time they become multimodal, and then it becomes almost like this idea that if they are expressing or faking empathy, I don't know if humans do the same. When you're kids, are you really empathizing with someone, or you're actually learning to empathize by really faking how other people are doing it, right?
yeah,
And somehow that trains you. Oh, this is the emotion that actually I should have. So you're able to interpret and build that structure
yes,
in yourself.
maybe. Mm.
Okay, we should write a paper together Sunday,
Yes, or
someday.
maybe book.
All right, last two topics and then we wrap up. Very easy topics, okay, I promise.
Okay,
Very
getting
easy
just
topics.
just easier.
Easier than before. And I'll tell you the last topic is more easier for you than the one that I'm just sharing. How do you see this? And I was always interested to ask you this question. So, I've
Okay,
been waiting to ask you on this
okay.
podcast.
Uh-huh.
I feel it very funny, but not surprised when I look at companies like Google, who really did very path bearing and fundamental work, building the concept of transformers,
Yeah.
and yet could not really activate the consumer experience with maybe the perceived understanding is they were fearful, or
Yeah.
they were quite aware that they were not sure how it would kind of manifest and affect its brand. And then you have a new kid on the block just coming in and forgetting about all those fears and just say, I don't care it, just try. And I think this represents almost a mindset, right? It's not so
Yeah.
that's not super surprising when you have that, but there are companies who have investing deep amount of money and
Yeah.
energy in these for many years. So it's we are all working on and building upon the on actually standing on the shoulders of these giants. And yet in mainstream we're talking about, oh, is Google even relevant these days? But I mean,
Yeah.
the amount of innovations to get to a tensor chip and to be able to build a cloud infrastructure that can train these, there's so much that has gone in, and without that there would have been
Yeah.
no open AIs and all this.
Yes.
How do you see that, looking at a practitioner, looking outside now, looking at this industry? How do you interpret all this? What is your
Uh,
thinking about it?
yes. I mean, I think so I'm not sure whether we talked about this before, right? But I think so the thing about Google is, right, it's a very technology driven company. And I always think they're really not that good on the product side. So uh I mean also what you know about the company culture, right? So it's really driven by sort of uh, like innovation, complexity. And then if you look at the like what are Google products, and then I think Google Maps, right? So the first time Google Maps came out, everybody was amazed that, oh, I didn't know you could even do something like that in a browser, but they never. So, but it's not really like a. So they're not very customer focused. So, and I think that's probably also what happened here. So they had this whole like the whole, and then they're also a super big company, right? So they could just afford people working on transformers, and then they just had people do research about stuff without really like thinking what is the product to this. And then I think, yeah, OpenAI was really different. And then I'm not super familiar, but also something changed, right? When they switched from being like a non-profit to actually being very much for profit. And then I think that's really like the difference between that and like a startup culture. So, and so I'm not surprised that Google sort of didn't make. I think the other very interesting thing is also is Facebook, like, or Meta, having also like doing a lot of work, like the whole PyTorch stuff comes out of Meta. Jan LeCun is there. But obviously, I mean, for Facebook, because they don't even have like a cloud business, right? They're not selling any SaaS kind of services. Uh, yeah, they didn't have. So I think for me, by the way, this is the big irony is, you remember when so for, like the timeline was, so OpenAI had this thing, and then Meta was actually releasing the llama weights for research, right? And then they got leaked, and
Yeah,
then suddenly people were building all these open source models so that you could just try it out at home. And I mean, now they're cracking down on all these and making sure that all these copies get deleted and so on. But it's really interesting how sort of how Facebook helped, I think, opening everything up for open source large language models at the time. And I'm sometimes thinking
yeah,
this, maybe it was because they were so focused on the metaverse,
yeah,
right? They weren't really. I think now it has changed, right? But that at that point, maybe it was really under the radar and they didn't really think about it that much.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's totally agree with that. I think this is also very interesting to see that this is new, not new, right? So a lot of times, if you look at the
Yeah.
companies like BlackBerry and Nokia, they're pioneers around building devices, and BlackBerry was the first kind of
Yeah.
very prominent smartphone. And then you have a new kid in the block, companies building interesting stuff, and then Apple comes in, and um, Andy Rubin joins Google, and I don't know if you saw this documentary called Journal Magic, about Journal Magic. I think it was there a few years ago. Journal Magic was probably the first companies that really conceived like the modern smartphone with
Okay.
touchscreen, full
Never heard of
touch.
it. Yeah, never
Yeah,
heard
so
of
it's
it.
pretty interesting. So all I saw the documentary recently, and it's just I highly recommend it. It's just a
Okay, very good. I will.
walk down the memory lane on what could have been. So
Yeah.
all these people actually who worked there now basically created industries. The person who obviously built the iPod, iPhone, Apple
Hmm.
Watch, Safari, Android, Andy Rubin, and I think everybody in that worked in that place
Oh, really?
in the
Okay.
90s, and the
Uh-huh.
company went bust because they built
Yes.
amazing product, but there was no customer,
Yeah.
and then they just lost, and then they just said in the document it was like an amazing product but too ahead of its time.
Hmm.
It was not consumer focused, and it just lost.
Yeah.
And then obviously 10 years later everything came in, and it was very kind of emotional to see a company that like had such a powerful imagination of what could have been, but just they were in
Yeah.
different generation, they were in different timeline.
Yeah.
So this just comes to my mind when I look at also this interesting conflict in play of bigger companies not able to do stuff, and suddenly there's
Yes.
a small company and
Yeah.
doing interesting. They have no fear.
Yes. Yeah. It's so we talk. Did we talk about Wordly maps, or I don't know?
I
Or
think
do you
we
know
did
about
not,
them?
but I'm
Yeah.
aware of Worldly
Yeah,
Maps.
yeah. I think there
Yeah,
also has a whole piece like like at the stage, when so there's this product inception and then it gets
yeah,
refined.
Genesis stage.
Yes. And then
Yeah,
right before commoditization, I think he says, so it's usually not the company who invented the product who makes the stage into commoditization.
yeah,
The reason is because they're like too entrenched into their like IBM, right? IBM wasn't the one who invented the cloud,
yeah,
although they were like the biggest computing services or one of the biggest at the time, right? But then they think, the cloud, I don't know, but then we lose all our old contracts and so on. So that's like there are really mechanisms that why this happens.
yeah. Okay, so we should also teach MBA program maybe someday.
Yes.
Okay, wrapping up. The last question, the easiest one. Okay. You've been working on this project around building these feeds based on Mastodon, right?
Yes.
Um, um, and
My
maybe I will put you on spot for a very easy question.
okay.
How, looking at Twitter and what's happening there, and then Mastodon and emerging social networks, Blue Sky.
Yeah.
I heard Meta is working on the chat-based or text-based social engine.
Oh yeah.
What maybe to you could be an ideal social network?
Aha. This is
The
okay.
easiest one at the end for you.
Yes. Well, this is a great question. By the way, am I allowed? Can I pitch my side project?
You can, of course.
Yeah. So it's
Of
called
course.
Fedi Stats, like Fediverse, and
I'll
then
put it
Fedi
also on
Stats
the notes.
dot
So yeah,
cc. Yeah, they definitely
feedystats.cc. Okay.
need some more eyes. And then what I'm doing essentially in feeding, like taking data off of Mastodon and then looking for hashtags and links and compiling all kinds of feeds. And yeah, I've been using this actually to track the AI stuff, right? So you only get stuff that gets mentioned multiple times, and it works remarkably well. So I mean, it's quite interesting, really. So the only problem is I haven't figured out how to make it into a product yet. So it's it could maybe need more eyes. Anyway, yes. So okay. So the social, the what is a good? So okay. So my 5 cents on what's wrong with social media is it's too manual, right? So I was
Hmm.
discussing this with somebody on Blue Sky, and then Blue Sky they had a post out where they have this idea on a marketplace of timeline algorithms. So and if you are you on Blue Sky or
I'm not, but I'm
okay.
now excited based on what
Yes.
you're describing. Go
So
for it.
you have so I mean right now it's really more like a prototype, but so you have not just like your timeline, like your um, chronological timeline, and then there's like a what's hot, but actually so anybody can release their own timeline algorithm. So somebody made like a mutual followers, and I think you could just do whatever you want. You could have some which is just cat gifs, right? Or maybe actually I think maybe my Fedi stats could also be a timeline where you only have AI related stuff or something like that,
Hmm.
right? And they said so the problem with Twitter, right? So you have the chronological timeline and then but everybody hates the for you because people think like it's manipulated and people are
Right.
paying for it and so on. So maybe you could open it up more. And then I was discussing this with somebody and I thought that's actually the problem is it's too manual, right? So also like why Twitter is such a toxic place is, right? So if you post something controversial, then you have all these trolls in your timeline and you can't do anything about it. So you can block them one by one, right? But it's not, doesn't make a lot of sense. So I was thinking, or maybe one idea is, so why don't we have more automation, like more like a spam filter on social media, right? So that all these people who are trying to rescue don't even see them; they just get blocked. Like, or you like if a friend blocks somebody, you also block them, right? So if you have a friend who trusts you, and then at least because I think like, so if social media is like a big place and everybody is talking to everybody else, so normally in like physical social spaces, there's also this kind of protection that you have, right? So if somebody comes to you and starts arguing with you, then maybe you have a few friends who come in and say and protect you or something, right? Or there's the, I think it's
Right.
still too manual. So, and this is,
So
but this is sort of me proposing a technological solution to a social problem. So this definitely cannot be the answer.
very unique and very new, actually.
Yes, yeah, I hate it when that happens. So
So what you're saying is less manual, perhaps more automation. You give an example of this community driven timelines of
yeah,
Blue Sky. And what was the third one you said? Like, I like this metaphor of you are in a social space, which is a curated space created by you, and then somebody, a troll coming in physically.
yeah,
Then other people can say, hey, you are not allowed.
yes.
Yeah, I like that metaphor. And I think so
Uh,
that you see as the elements of an ideal social network. Is that?
no, but I think it's so right now it's too manual and too unprotected, right? So there's not a lot you can do. I think the so on Twitter, you cannot even, so you can block them, but others can still see it, right?
Yeah.
So I think they're like in Instagram, if somebody's in your comments, you can delete the comment. So you still have to deal with the person, but
Yeah.
at least you can keep your comments sort of clean, right? And then
Yeah.
it's not that visible to other people. So, and I'm thinking, so you have to make all these, so am I going to follow, right? So you have to hand curate your timeline, all of that. Why isn't there like a bot for you that sort of learns what you're interested in and then
So you need
make
a kind of
make
a
sure you
social
did it?
media co-pilot of sorts.
Well, maybe Copilot, yes. Yeah. So this reminds me of the, do you remember the Neuromancer kind of
Neuromancer.
books,
Yes.
right? So when they go into the metaverse kind of space, the cyberspace, everybody
Yeah.
has these eyes, this protective programs. So something
Yeah.
like that, right? So you have
Very interesting.
your little side bot, and then if somebody, yeah, but the other, but well, probably won't work because then like these. I mean, one big problem I think with social media is like everybody lives in their own bubble.
Yeah.
So this will only get worse, I
This will
guess.
only get worse.
Yeah,
Yeah. I agree. Okay. So basically, the answer is it's very hard to get a social network. One spectrum, it becomes too boring. The other spectrum, it becomes an echo chamber.
yeah,
Echo chamber, boring, and on the side, very interesting but very polarizing. Maybe that's the spectrum.
yes, yeah,
All right. Thank you so much. I think that's the
yes,
last question, last point I had with you. I really appreciate you taking the time. I hope it was useful use of your evening time talking to me.
yes, definitely. And I hope it was also interesting for the listeners.
I think so. I think
I hope,
not having a pre-described agenda and just talking freely about things was super useful for me.
yeah, they also very good chat with
Yeah.
you, Vivek.
Thank you so much. I will definitely leave the link to your project
Thank you.
so more people will be able to play with it. And maybe we'll do a round three sometime soon. But for now, thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Yes, you too.
Bye.
Bye.